The Chicago Bears' biggest offseason addition, subtraction, surprises, winners, and losers all revolves around the work they put in on the trenches and specifically the offensive line.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears, on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to go through some offseason awards and superlatives for the Chicago Bears. We're kind of at that point now where all of the real offseason activities and events are done, and nothing else will happen until training camp. At least nothing else scheduled will happen until training camp. So it's a good time to kind of check in and take stock of what this offseason has been, what it has brought, and how that shapes the team we're going to see come together for training camp. So we'll go through the biggest addition, the biggest subtraction, the most surprising move, the riskiest move, the sleeper move, the biggest winner and loser, a player who's in the clear, and a player who maybe shouldn't celebrate just yet if more moves could be coming down the pipeline. But let's start big picture here with the offseason as a whole. I want to include free agency, the NFL draft, trades, etc., in terms of the biggest addition for this Bears team. And I'll preface this by saying Ben Johnson's probably the answer to a lot of these questions. And a lot of these questions we talk about, like winners and stuff, like Caleb Williams. I'm trying to avoid the super obvious, yes, the biggest change and addition the Bears made this offseason was hiring Ben Johnson as their head coach. But that's obvious. That's 10,000 feet view. That's anybody can pay attention and notice that. And some biggest subtraction is probably Matt Eberflus. Of course, there's some obvious answers to some of these questions. But I want to get a little bit more, I don't want to say in the weeds, but a little bit more in depth on this Bears roster and the things that are a little bit more impactful and specific to the team. And when I look at all the additions the Bears have made in terms of the free agent signings, the trades, the draft picks, I think the overall biggest addition player for this team is Joe Thuney. He is the best player the Bears added this offseason. And I struggle with this one because, is a left guard going to be the highest impact player individually on this Bears roster that they added this offseason? I don't know. I think the influence he has on whoever's going to be the left tackle next to him and whoever and Drew Dahlman at center next to him is going to be really key. I think his leadership in the locker room, his stabilizing presence on that line is going to be really key, and he'll be more valuable to this team than just a Pro Bowl left guard on the field, but something that offers them immense value beyond that. And I think being able to get a player of that caliber the way the Bears did was super, super important. And I just think in terms of the addition they've made that I'm most confident is going to be great, is going to have a big impact this season, right? There's a chance that Colston Loveland or Luther Burden has a great rookie season. They could be breakout players that are a bigger impact player, but as rookies, we're not exactly sure. Maybe they could be a little bit slower coming along. We'll see. But I think there's something about Thuney where he's got the fewest question marks, the best track record, all the box checks. There's really nothing negative about the Thuney addition other than the fact that he's 32, but you're still going to get, that's not that old, especially when it comes to offensive linemen in the NFL. So to me, he's far and away the biggest addition. Now, when we go to biggest subtraction, I tried to approach this as biggest subtraction as in the player who will be missed the most, or the player who is the hardest to see go, whose absence might be felt the most. And this one was tough to me because the Bears just don't have a lot of departures this offseason. I thought about DeMarcus Walker because they still haven't really properly replaced him on the defensive line. I thought he'd be a better scheme fit for Dennis Allen than evidently the Bears thought. Keenan Allen obviously is a big void at wide receiver, had a lot of targets and a lot of production last season and is a really good player. And probably Luther Burden probably won't be year one as good as Keenan Allen was last season. But I think the biggest subtraction I kept coming back to is actually Tevin Jenkins on the offensive line. That's the player who I think has the most potential for the Bears to regret moving on from. And understanding he only signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with the Browns, right? He did not have a huge market in free agency, and we all get why the Bears didn't re-sign him. The durability and availability questions were too significant, and fixing the interior of the offensive line was too important. Like, I'm not saying the Bears should have kept Tevin Jenkins and should have made him a starter. Certainly should have kept him in place of, Joe Thuney, right? Obviously, the Bears did the better move, but I think you could see Tevin Jenkins go on to have a good career elsewhere and be like, man, it sucks that wasn't with the Bears, and it's too bad they weren't able to keep him around and make that work in Chicago. Whereas, like, everybody else that the Bears moved on from, it's like, it's probably time to move on from Keenan Allen. DeMarcus Walker was a little bit disappointing the last couple of seasons, and there weren't a lot of other, Gerald Everett was a huge bust. Coleman Shelton, the center, you were trying to get rid of him. Like, everybody else, you were pretty eager and excited to move on from. Tevin was the one who was probably the easiest to sell yourself on holding on to if they had held on to him, but they didn't. They'll be fine without him. We're wishing him the best of luck, but you could see him going to the Browns this year and having a good year and then getting a big payday from someone else next offseason. You go, former Bear going on to have a good career. That's too bad that it didn't work out for him in Chicago. Last one here before we move on. The most surprising move of the offseason. Honestly, I wanted to put Joe Thuney here because I just didn't think Joe Thuney was within reach for the Bears. That it wasn't a play. All the Trey Smith rumors, right? And Jonah Jackson was something that had been rumored for a little while. Like, we kind of had offensive line targets in mind, and Joe Thuney didn't seem like he was within the realm of possibilities of a real person the Bears could go out and get. But it would be boring if I made Joe Thuney the biggest addition and the most surprising move and, the biggest winner. You could put good players in some of these categories as multiple time winners. But I think Thuney is definitely the best and biggest addition they made, and perhaps the most surprising move, but I think a close second, and who I would actually say give most surprising move here. I think we were all pretty darn surprised when the Bears took Colston Loveland with the 10th overall pick in this draft. It wasn't completely out of nowhere, but it wasn't what we expected at all. And I use the term most surprising here not to mean a negative, right? I think Colston Loveland was right there as best player available on the board when the Bears took him at 10th overall. It just was most unexpected. We didn't know exactly what direction they'd go, but a lot of Bears fans were hoping for a running back, hoping for a left tackle. They weren't really on the board at that point. So then were you reaching for a pass rusher, or are you taking just best available player? And it feels like that's where Colston Loveland landed for them. They had him above Tyler Warren, so I don't know if there was any other player besides Tyler Warren and Loveland that were in the conversation as best player available there. So it makes sense, and that's why it's not like shocking, but it was pretty surprising to see them take a tight end despite their apparent faith and confidence in Cole Kmet. But clearly Ben Johnson has a vision for what Colston Loveland can be in this Bears offense. And I think despite him starting off with an injury here that was known when they drafted him, I think he may have a slower rookie season, but can certainly develop and have a strong career. I think he's going to have a bright future as a weapon in Ben Johnson's offense to be that sort of Sam Laporta type player that can open up the middle of the field a little bit and be a dynamic playmaker after the catch and give you some things at tight end that Cole Kmet just doesn't quite have from a physical tool standpoint, from an athleticism, from a speed, from a making guys miss after the catch that ultimately I think put Ben Johnson over the top for someone like Loveland. But I want to turn our attention from here to some of the other superlatives here that are a little bit more tricky, right? Like players that aren't necessarily like great or bad, but somewhere in the middle here. I want to go through the riskiest moves the Bears have made this offseason, maybe a couple of sleeper moves that have flown under the radar a little bit, and then we'll go through a biggest winner and loser and some players who are in the clear and maybe not quite yet in the clear next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder where all your money went between, dining out and entertainment and online shopping? Sometimes it can be easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I love it because it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. Because I used to have a different app for all my different accounts, right? I had an app for my credit card. I could check my payments on there. I had an app for my checking account, my savings account, my bank, my credit union app. I had an app for my retirement account, so I could see how that's doing, and an app for my other investments. And if I wanted to have a picture of my finances, to sign into 4 different accounts and keep tabs on everything, with Monarch Money, it's all in one place where you can check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Okay, so we've gone through some of the big headliner moves, right? Biggest addition, biggest subtraction, the big names, biggest surprises. How about some moves that aren't as earth-shattering, but have the potential to be more or perhaps less than we thought they would be when the moves happen? Like the riskiest move for the Chicago Bears this offseason. This was the most difficult category for me to pick a winner between 2 players. I kind of would like to just give it to both because they're on opposite sides, but I forced myself to pick a favorite, and I'll explain why. But to me, the riskiest move the Bears made this offseason was the trade for Jonah Jackson. And very, very close to that I struggled with. Is it Jonah Jackson or is it Dayo Odeyingbo on the defensive line? We talked about him a little bit on last week's podcast about the edge rushers and some of the risks the Bears are running there. Both of those players, to me, have a lot of bust potential. They have boom potential as well, and both could be great and be Pro Bowl caliber players for the Bears. You could also see either one of them flaming out and being a not a great use of the team's resources. But I went with Jonah Jackson just slightly ahead because, A, the Bears did trade a draft pick for him, albeit a day 3 draft pick, not an expensive draft pick, whereas Dayo Odeyingbo did not cost any draft picks. He was just a free agent signing. But then on top of that, they gave Jonah Jackson the contract extension that locks them into his deal for this season and likely all of next season without some major financial penalties there. And his injury history the last 2 seasons is robust. It's scary. It makes me concerned that he's not going to be available for the Bears the way Tevin Jenkins wasn't available for the Bears, right? Like Jonah Jackson played 4 games last season. He played 12 the year before that. He played 13 the year before that. That's 29 games in the last 3 seasons. That's less than 10 games per season the last 3 years, right? This isn't just a guy coming off a 1 injured season, but like a consistent track record in Detroit and the Rams of missing time. And at least with Dayo Odeyingbo on the defensive line, who I also see as a very risky move, he's been durable, right? The risk with Dayo Odeyingbo is that he hasn't been a top-flight pass rusher, and the Bears are paying him $16 million a year, and he had 3 sacks last season. Like the risk with Odeyingbo is that he's a 3 or a 5 sack guy making $16 million a year, and like that's not good enough for the salary. But the risk for Jonah Jackson is that you're paying him $17 million a year to be on the injury report, that you have to have a backup in there because he's hurt. Like at least Odeyingbo, while there's questions about how good he'll be, he'll be on the field. With Jonah Jackson, there's questions about whether he'll be on the field and how good he'll be once he's on the field because he hasn't been a Pro Bowler since 2021. So you can certainly see the outcome here where Jonah Jackson is great. He's healthy. He plays at a Pro Bowl level, and it's a steal for the Bears. You can also see the outcome where he's injured for most of the season, doesn't play well when he's healthy, and the Bears have to rely on a backup starting at right guard because Jackson's been hurt so much, and that's going to be really detrimental to this Bears offensive line. And to put so much investment in Jonah Jackson as the solution at right guard without having a ton of depth behind him either is kind of the other aspect of this, makes him, to me, the most risky move. But how about in the more positive direction, a sleeper move? A move that doesn't get a lot of attention, isn't getting a lot of national hype or headlines, but could end up paying off a lot more than you might have thought it would. I'm going with the sleeper draft pick, running back Kyle Monangai in the 7th round, although I consider quarterback Case Keenum as one here, given his influence on Caleb Williams and everything in the background that he'll help with there, with Caleb and Tyson Bagent as a veteran in the quarterback room. We talked about him and his impact as a potential secret weapon for the Bears quarterbacks, a couple weeks ago now on the podcast, so go take a listen back to that if you want more on why Case Keenum is a sleeper here. But for me, Kyle Monangai is a player that a forgotten running back in this draft class. I didn't count, but a bunch of running backs came off the board before he did this year, right? Not somebody who was a highly touted running back pick here. If I just eyeball the list of running backs, I'd say close to 20 running backs came off the board before Kyle Monarch did. A 7th-round pick, 233 overall. Most 7th-round picks don't amount to anything. But I think Kyle Monarch will not only amount to something, but be a real key contributor for the Bears this season right away as a rookie and throughout his rookie contract. I don't know if he'll ever become the number 1 running back, the 1,000-yard bell cow in the backfield, but I think he has enough baseline traits as a physical runner with good contact balance, good enough speed and acceleration, even if he's not dynamically explosive and quick, but like good enough speed plus great contact balance. He's hard to tackle. He's physical. He's pretty good in pass protection. I think he has potential to contribute as a receiver out of the backfield as well. He just wasn't used that much in college, but I think he can do it just fine. Like, this to me feels like a player who makes it impossible for you to release him and cut him from your 53 and try and keep him on the practice squad, because he's just that tough and physical and good and a special team contributor that fights and tooth and nail his way onto this roster and ends up being a more significant contributor than you would expect from most 7th-round picks for most teams across the NFL. It's a combination of liking the prospect more than what a 7th-round pick might be, and also liking the opportunity he has in Chicago to make a bigger impact, given the lack of running back depth that is, proven and high quality there. One more slightly negative award, and then we'll get to some more positives here. But I want to do biggest winner and loser. Let's start with the biggest loser here, and then we'll go to biggest winner and the rest of our superlatives here. This one was another tricky one, but I think the biggest loser for me is probably Braxton Jones at left tackle, in part because he's injured, but that didn't happen this offseason. It happened late last season. So it's not as though something new happened to him from an injury standpoint, but I just think the combination of being injured and then them drafting Ozzie Trapillo to essentially replace him, all while being in the contract year, that's what makes Braxton Jones the biggest loser to me. There are other guys who are losing playing time in significant ways. Someone like wide receiver Tyler Scott could be a big loser. You could think of Cole Kmet as a loser because Colton Loveland is here to take his job eventually, or Zach Pickens, I think, is a big loser this offseason. But Braxton Jones is the only one of that group that's like facing an immediate threat of making less money because of what the Bears did this offseason. He's entering the last year of his contract. He needed to have a healthy, good year as the starting left tackle to then cash in as a free agent next offseason. And maybe he'll still be able to do that if he gets healthy early enough in training camp and can beat out Ozzie Trapillo, but they're not making it easy on him. And if he loses the starting role to Ozzie Trapillo this year, Trapillo starts the rest of the year or whatever, and Jones enters free agency kind of as a backup, he will have lost tens of millions of dollars that he would have gotten had he been a starter all season for Chicago. So like those kind of financial stakes to me make him the biggest loser. Whereas like, yes, it's going to be a challenge for Cole Kmet in the future. Like the drafting of Loveland is probably the beginning of what will eventually be the end of Cole Kmet in Chicago, but he already got his big contract. He's already getting paid, whether the Bears choose to trade him in a couple seasons or not. Like, he's getting that money. So he's not as much of a loser as Braxton Jones in that regard. And then like Zach Pickens is still got a couple years of his rookie deal left. So them drafting Shamar Turner and signing other defensive tackles isn't necessarily costing him immediate money the way that Braxton Jones is slowly watching dollar signs go out the door as Ozzie Trapillo impresses at OTAs and mandatory minicamp. He has a chance to turn that around, though. If he still wins the left tackle job in training camp, he won't be the biggest loser anymore. And then I'd probably go Zach Pickens, maybe Cole Kmet as well. But I certainly think for now, you got to feel for Braxton Jones. I want to do a podcast here going through the Braxton Jones situation a little bit more in detail, but that's going to be for another time. Also want to get to some winners and some players who should be celebrating based on what the Bears did and didn't do this offseason, as we continue our Chicago Bears offseason superlatives and awards next on Locked On Bears. All right, we talked about the loser and the risky player, but how about a winner? How about some celebration? How about the player who I think benefited the most, or I don't want to say benefited the most, like almost got away with the most? The player the Bears have done all their major offseason moves, and this player should probably be the happiest based on everything the Bears did. And I will again sort of preface this by saying the super obvious answer that we're not going to do here is Caleb Williams, because of course, like everything the Chicago Bears do is with Caleb Williams in mind. They everything they added, everything they improved the offense and the defense is to help the quarterback, right? So of course, like Caleb Williams is kind of going to be the de facto biggest winner. But like to me, if we set aside quarterback and head coach like we talked about at the beginning, the biggest winner has to be DeAndre Swift then, right? Like the fact that they go through this whole process of the offseason with all of the notably outside external expectations, not so much internal expectations, that they would upgrade the running back position, either replacing him or adding more significant competition for him. For him to have gotten through free agency and the draft and trades and all that, and the only new running back added to the roster is a 7th-round pick from Rutgers, that to me is a big win for DeAndre Swift. As much as I like Kyle Monangai, and as much as I think Roshan Johnson will have a bigger role in this Bears offense this offseason, DeAndre Swift, it feels like he's lucky to still be the undisputed number 1 running back in Chicago. The Bears seem to be trying to trade up for running backs in the draft as well. Like they tried to make that happen and they just couldn't do it, and Swift is going to be the beneficiary of that. I don't believe that the Bears are still going to make a running back trade. They're not. I just can't see them trading for Kenneth Walker or James Cook or Breece Hall or any of the big name running back speculation trades that Bears fans love to go out and do this time of year. They could still sign a veteran backup, but I just don't think a splash at running back is something that's in the cards for Chicago. So it's going to be DeAndre Swift as your number 1 running back. And he would be a big winner even if they had. I mean, just in terms of like the offensive line upgrades they made for Caleb Williams will also be offensive line upgrades for DeAndre Swift. Like that's another factor. We talk about, Caleb Williams can have so much more time to throw with Joe Thuney and Drew Dalman and Jonah Jackson. DeAndre Swift should have more room to run with Joe Thuney, Drew Dalman, and Jonah Jackson. Like, even if there wasn't a running back competition question, he has still been a winner of this offseason because he should have better blocking in front of him and a better run game scheme from an offensive coach who's been very, very good at running the ball. So for Swift to come back playing for a coach who he's played for before, who traded him away from his previous team and didn't trade him away this offseason and didn't really bring in any major competition for him, that's a big win for DeAndre Swift. And I think he should be wiping some sweat from his forehead a little bit and saying, whew, that's a bullet dodged there. He has a real opportunity here to reemerge and reestablish himself as a quality running back in this NFL so that whether the Bears want to bring him back for year 3 or whether they decide to move on for him, that he can, catch on with another team and show that he's still a high caliber player in whatever backfield he's going to play for next offseason. It's sort of a similar category as big winner there to what I wanted to differentiate with this next one here is I thought about, first I want to go to a player who shouldn't celebrate just yet, that might feel like a winner, but I'm not convinced that their battle yet is totally settled. But then on the flip side of that, a player who I think is in the clear, which is kind of a similar reasoning as DeAndre Swift, but you wouldn't necessarily call the other player a big winner of the offseason here. But the player who I think shouldn't celebrate yet because they're not quite in the clear just yet is Austin Booker, 5th-round pick last year. He's right up there as the number 3 defensive end on the depth chart right now, in my eyes, behind Montez Sweat and Dio Dengbo. That's a major, major role in this Bears defense, and his only real competition right now is Dominique Robinson, who was a healthy scratch for most of last season. If everything proceeds towards the regular season as it is right now on paper, Austin Booker will play a lot at defensive end and have a major role and a major opportunity to have bigger production this season. However, it's still really hard for me to envision them proceeding exactly the way it is right now. It just feels like they have to do something at defensive end. Whether that's Dominique Robinson emerging the way Ben Johnson praised him during OTAs, whether that's signing a free agent like Zadarius Smith or Tano Passanio or Preston Smith or Matthew Judon or anybody else who's out there, they just don't have enough depth at defensive end. They cannot go into week 1 with the plan as Austin Booker is your number 3 defensive end. It just doesn't feel smart or safe or responsible to make this your plan A at the edge rusher position. I mean, there's been talk about Dexter or Turner kicking out the edge. I just feel like they have to do something there and can't just call it Booker and Dominique Robinson and say that's good enough. So that's where I say, don't celebrate just yet. He's been a winner so far, but I think more is still to come at that position there. If I was looking for a runner-up here, I'd put both the safeties, Elijah Hicks and Jonathan Owens. I still think the Bears may also look at some free agent safeties to add some better, more experienced depth. We mentioned a few times on this podcast that there's like 3 or 4 safeties that are free agents right now who played for Dennis Allen's defenses in New Orleans and elsewhere that would make a lot of sense as better backups. This defensive coaching staff didn't draft Elijah Hicks. This defensive coaching staff didn't sign Jonathan Owens as a free agent. They inherited these backups. I think they'd like to do better than these backups, and I wonder if between now and week 1, they do add more at safety as well. So there's another spot where I'd say, hey, don't celebrate just yet. But a player who I do think is in the clear that makes him kind of a winner here, but more just like a player who it's more like the dodged a bullet award than biggest winner. That's what I kind of want to differentiate it, is Ryan Bates on the offensive line. It's another position where I thought the Bears should do more to upgrade the depth there, and I'm not as confident that they will do more. Ryan Bates is, right now, to me, he's your number 1 backup at center and both guard spots. If any of those 3 players are down, Ryan Bates is the first man off the bench at any of those 3 spots. They brought back Doug Kramer as the backup center, who I think is kind of third string behind Ryan Bates there. They drafted Luke Newman in the 6th round out of Michigan State. But like those guys are not, certainly not starting caliber guards and maybe not NFL caliber offensive linemen just yet. Like not guys that you want to put on the field for significant snaps. I think the bigger threat to Ryan Bates' playing time is if they move Karan Amagaji to guard. That if Braxton Jones and Ozzie Trapillo are your top 2 tackles, then, like starter and backup at left tackle, then I think there could be a future for Amagaji at guard, and then maybe he could be competing and pushing Ryan Bates in there. But the depth on the offensive line is really not anything to write home about on the interior. Not a lot of experience there other than Ryan Bates. And Bates was a player who we thought could potentially be a salary cap casualty this offseason. If the Bears were, trying to create some extra space, they would have saved, I don't have the exact number, $3 or $4 million by releasing Ryan Bates this offseason. They did DeMarcus Walker instead. They would have saved $3.5 million had they saved Ryan Bates. Instead, he costed them $4 million to keep, or they would have saved $3.5 million of that had they released him. They could have signed another backup for less than the money they saved on him. But they decided to keep him after trading for him last year for a 5th round pick. And I think he dodged a bullet there because he could have easily been someone that Ben Johnson's coaching staff says, well, we didn't want that guy. We didn't trade for that guy. Let's save the cap space and go sign somebody else that we like a little bit better. But they didn't. And so they're rolling with him. And I think that's, we don't know exactly how good Ryan Bates is, I guess. I think he's fine, but you could do a lot better, but you could do a lot worse. So I wouldn't say I'm confident in Ryan Bates, but I think you can get by with Ryan Bates as your backup guard or center. If he has to start a game or 2, I think you can survive and get by. But certainly if somebody like Jonah Jackson misses significant time, I don't love the idea of a lot of Ryan Bates, but a little Ryan Bates, I think you can get by with. And so that's their plan A as the interior backup offensive lineman. And I thought they might opt for a different plan A. They didn't, so he dodged a bit of a bullet there. But that sort of brings together here all of our offseason superlatives, right? I try not to be like too overly negative killing players and moves and not too overly positive, pretending everything the Bears did this offseason was great and perfect and sunshine and rainbows. And I hope that this sort of gave you a wide swath of a little bit of both sides of the equation there. Make sure that you keep tuning in to the Locked On Bears podcast each and every day that we're coming out. We're only doing 3 days a week this time of year because it's the slow season, but in the ramp up to training camp, we'll get back to a full 5 days a week. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go check out another Locked On podcast for your second listen today, whether it's Locked On Bulls, Cubs, White Sox, Blackhawks, college sports, Fighting Illini, or in any other city, any other team you like. Got you covered on the Locked On Podcast Network. So go listen to another Locked On podcast for your second listen. Come on back and make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for our next podcast to give you another opportunity to bear down.